after what has been said, the next thing to go through is time. First, it is well to go through the puzzles about it, and through the external accounts, to see whether it is among the beings or non-beings, and then what its nature is. That time either does not exist at all, or does so scarcely, or in a vague way, might be suspected on the basis of the following considerations. One part of time has been and is not, while another part of it will be and is not yet. And from these, both unlimited time and whatever time is taken on any given occasion are composed. What is composed of non-beings, however, might seem to be incapable of participating in being. In addition, in the case of everything that is divisible into parts, if it is necessary that when it is, either all or some of its parts must be. In the case of time, by contrast, although it is divisible into parts, some parts have been, some parts are to be, but none is. For the now is not a part. For a part is measured, and the whole is composed of parts. But time does not seem to be composed of nows. Further, it is not easy to see whether the now, which appears to divide the past from the future, remains one and the same on all occasions, or is a distinct thing on distinct ones. For, if it is always a distinct one on a distinct occasion, and if distinct parts in time are not simultaneous, unless one encompasses and the other is encompassed, as the shorter time is encompassed by the larger. And if the now that is not, but was previously, must have passed away at some time, then the nows will not be simultaneous either, and it must always be that the previous now has passed away. Well, it cannot have passed away in itself, because it then exists, whereas to have passed away in another now is impossible for a previous now. For we take it that it's impossible for nows to be contiguous to each other, as it is for a point to be contiguous to a point. If indeed then it has not passed away in the next now, but in another one, it will be simultaneously in the nows in between them, which are unlimitedly many. But this is impossible. But then it is not possible either for the now to remain the same on all occasions. For nothing that is divisible and limited has only one limit, whether it is continuous in one direction or in more than one. But the now is a limit, and it is possible to take a limited time. Furthermore, if to be together with respect to time, and neither before nor after, is to be at one and the same now, and if earlier and later nows are at this very now, then events of 10,000 years ago will be simultaneous with events of today, and nothing will be either before or after anything else. So much, then, by way of going through the puzzles concerning the things that belong to time. As to what time is, and what its nature is, what is left equally unclear both by what has been handed down to us and by our previous discussions, some say that it is movement of the whole universe, others that it is the sphere itself. And yet a part of the revolution of the universe is also a time, but a revolution it certainly is not. For what was taken was a part of a revolution, not a revolution. Further, if there were more than one heaven, the movement of any whatsoever would equally be time, so that many distinct times would be together. The sphere of the whole universe was believed to be time by those who said it was, because everything is both in time and in the sphere of the whole universe. but this view is too simple-minded for us to investigate its impossible consequences. But since time seems most of all to be a sort of movement and change, this we must investigate. Now, the change and movement of a given thing is only in the thing that is changing, or whatever the thing itself that is moving and changing happens to be. Time, by contrast, is present equally everywhere and where everything is. Further, change is faster or slower, whereas time is not. For the fast and slow are defined by time. Fast being what moves much in little time, slow what moves little in much time. Time, though, is not defined by time, neither by its being so much nor by its being of a certain sort. It is evident, therefore, that time is not a movement, and it makes no difference to us at present whether we speak of movement or of change. But then neither does time exist without change. For when we ourselves do not change in our thoughts or do not notice that we have changed, then it does not seem to us that time has passed, just as it does not seem to have done so to the fabled sleepers among the heroes in Sardinia when they wake up. For they join together the earlier now to the later now and make them one, omitting what is in between because of lack of perception. So, just as if the now were not distinct, but one and the same, there would not have been time in the same way when it is distinct but is not noticed to be distinct. What is in between does not seem to be a time. If then our not thinking that there is time happens to us when we do not distinguish any change whatsoever, but rather the soul seems to remain in one indivisible now, and that when we perceive and distinguish, when we say that there is time, it is evident that time does not exist without movement and change. It is evident, then, that time neither is movement, nor does it exist without movement. And since we are inquiring into what time is, we must start from this, and ask what thing belonging to movement. For we do not perceive movement and time together, for even when it is dark, and nothing affects us through the body, but there is some movement in the soul, it immediately seems to us that some time has passed. Moreover, when some time seems to have passed, some movement also seems to have occurred together with it. So time is either movement or something belonging to movement. Since then it is not movement, it must be something belonging to or of movement. Since what moves from something to something, however, and since every magnitude is continuous, the movement follows along with the magnitude. For because the magnitude is continuous, the movement is continuous too, and because the movement is, the time is. For whatever the length of the movement is, that always seems to be the length of the time that has passed as well. Accordingly, the before and after is primarily in place, and there it is in their position. Since, though, the before and after is in the magnitude, it is necessary that the before and the after is also in the movement, by analogy, with the ones there. But then in time too the before and after is present, because of the one always following along with the other of them. Now, the before and after in movement is that thing, whatever it is, by being which motion is, i.e. is what it is. But the being for it is distinct and not a movement. But then again, we come to no time when we distinguish movement, defining it by the before and after. And we say that time has passed when we get a perception of the before and after in movement. And we define it by grasping one, now, and then another, and something else in between them. For whenever we understand the extremes to be distinct from what is intermediate, and the soul says that the nows are two, one earlier and the other later, it is then, and it is this, that we say time is. For what is given definition by the now is believed to be time, and we may assume this. Whenever we perceive the now as one and not either as before and after in the movement or as the same but belonging to something that is before and after, no time seems to have passed because there seems to have been no movement either. But whenever we do perceive the before and after, then we say that there is time. For time is just this, a number of change with respect to before and after. Time is therefore not movement, but rather movement insofar as it has number. A sign of this is the fact that we discern more and less by number, but more or less movement by time. Time is therefore a sort of number. Since, though, number is twofold, what is counted and what is countable, what we count them with are called number. Time is, of course, what is counted and not what we count by. And what we count by is distinct from what is counted. Also, just as movement is always distinct on every occasion, so too is time. But all simultaneous time is the same. For the now, whichever now it is the same, though the being for it is distinct. And the now measures time insofar as it is before and after. The now, though, is in a way the same and in a way not the same. For insofar as it occasions on different occasions, it is distinct. This is what it is for it to be the now. Whereas that, whatever it is, by being which the now is, i.e. is what it is the same. For, as we said, movement follows along with magnitude, and time follows along with movement, as we are saying here. And as in the case of the point, so in the case of the thing in spatial movement, by which we come to know movement and the before and after in it. And what is in spatial movement, in respect of that thing, whatever it is, by being which it is, what it is the same, whether a point, a stone, or something else of this sort. But in account it is distinct, just as the sophists take Corsicus in the Lyceum and Corsicus in the marketplace to be distinct. What is in spatial movement, then, is distinct by being in distinct places, and the now follows along with what is in spatial movement, just as the time does with the movement. For it is what is in spatial movement that we know the before and after in movement, and the before and after insofar as it is countable in the now. So, in this case too, that thing, whatever it is, by being which the now is, what it is the same, since it is the before and after in movement, although the being for it is different, since insofar as it is countable, it is the now. And it is this that is most knowable, for the movement too is known by what is moving, and spatial movement by what is in spatial movement. For what is in spatial movement is this something, whereas the movement is not. In one way, then, the now is always the same, and another, not the same. For what is in spatial movement is so too. It is evident too that if time did not exist, the now would not, and if the now did not, time would not. For just as what is in spatial movement and is spatial movement are together. For just as what is in spatial movement and its spatial movement are together, so too are the number of what is in spatial movement and its spatial movement. For the number of the spatial movement is time, while the now corresponds to what is in spatial movement as a sort of unit of number. Also, time is both continuous by virtue of the now and divided at the now. For this too follows along with the spatial movement and what is in spatial movement. For the movement, that is, the spatial movement, is one by virtue of what it is in spatial movement, because it is one, and not because that thing, whatever it is, by being which it is what it is one. Since that might leave intervals, but rather because it is one in account. And this is what gives definition to the movement as before and after. In this respect, too, the now follows along in a way with the point, for the point also makes the length continuous and gives it definition, since it is the start of one length and the end of another. But when one takes it in this way, treating the one point as two, one must come to a stop if the same point is going to be start and end. The now, on the other hand, because what is in spatial movement is in movement, is always a distinct one. So, time is a number, not as being the number of the same point, because it is both start and end, but more as the extremes are the number of the line, and not as the parts are, both because of what we said before, for we can treat the middle points as two, so that being at rest will result. And furthermore, because it is evident that the now is no part of time, nor the division a part of the movement, any more than the point is a part of a line. On the contrary, it is the two lines that are parts of the one line. Insofar as the now is a limit, then it is not time, but rather a coincident of it, an attribute. Whereas, insofar as it counts, it is a number. For limits belong only to what they are the limits of, whereas the number of these horses, 10, is elsewhere too. It is evident, therefore, that time is a number of movement with respect to the before and after, and that it is continuous, since what it is of is continuous. The smallest number, unconditionally, is the 2. But of a sort of number, in a way there is a smaller, in another way not. For example, of a line, the smaller number in plurality is 2 lines, or 1 line. But in magnitude, there is no smallest, since every line always divides. So it is with time too, for the smallest in number is the 1 or the 2, but in magnitude there is none. It is evident too that time is not said to be fast or slow, but many or few, and long or short. For insofar as it is continuous, it is long or short, whereas insofar as it is a number, it is many or few. It is not fast or slow, for no number with which we count is fast or slow either. Also, it is the same time everywhere at once, but not the same time before and after, because the present change is also one, whereas the past change and the future change are distinct. And time is not the number by which we count, but the number that is counted, and this, if it occurs before and after, is always distinct, since the nows are distinct. The number of 100 horses, or 100 human beings, is one and the same, but the things it is a number of are distinct, namely, the horses and the men. Further, in the way that a movement can be one and the same again and again, so too can time. For example, a year, a spring, or a fall. Not only do we measure the movement by the time, but also the time by the movement, because they are given definition by each other. For the time gives definition to the movement, since it is its number, and the movement to time. And we speak of much time and little time, measuring it by the movement, just as we measure the number by what is countable. For example, by the one horse we measure the number of horses, for it is by the number that we know the quantity of horses, and conversely, by the one horse that we know the number of horses itself. Similarly, in the case of time and movement, since we measure the movement by the time and the time by the movement. And it is reasonable that this has happened, because the movement follows along with the magnitude and the time with the movement, it being a quantity divisible and continuous. For it is because the magnitude is like this that the change has these attributes, and because movement is like this that time does. And we measure both magnitude by movement and movement by magnitude. For we say that road is long if the journey is long, and that the ladder is long if the road is long, and that the time is if the movement is, and the movement if the time. Since time is a measure of movement, however, and of being moved, and since it measures a movement by defining some movement that will measure out the whole, just as the cubit measures length by defining some magnitude that will measure out the whole. And for a movement to be in time is for both it and the existence of it to be measured by time. For time at once measures the movement and the existence of the movement. This is what it is to be in time, namely, for its existence to be measured. It is clear, though, that for other things too, this is what it is to be in time, for their existence to be measured by time. For to be in time is one or other of two things. One, to be when time is, or two, in the way that we say some things that are in number. Two, the latter signifies either what is a part or attribute of number, or in general something that belongs to number, or that there is a number of it. And since time is a number, the now, the before, and everything of this sort are in time in the way in which the unit and the odd are the even. The unit, the odd, and the even are in number. For the latter are something belonging to number, as the former are something belonging to time. Things, by contrast, are in time as they are in number, and if that is so, they are encompassed by time just as things in number are encompassed by number, in things in place by place. It is evident too that to be in time is not to be when time is, any more than to be in movement or in place is to be when movement is or when place is. For if this is what being in something is, to be, then all things will be in anything whatsoever, and the heaven will be in a grain of millet. Since then the grain is, so too is the heaven. But this is coincidental, whereas the other follows of necessity. And for what is in time, there must be a certain time when that thing is also. And for what is in movement, there must be movement at that time. Since, though, what is in time is so as in number, a time may be taken that is greater than that of all that is in time, which is why it is necessary for all things in time to be encompassed by time, just like the other things that are in something. For example, the ones in place that are encompassed by place. And a thing is affected in some respect by time, just as we are accustomed to say that time dissolves things, that everything grows old due to time, and forgets because of time. But not that it learns because of time, becomes young, or becomes beautiful. For time is intrinsically a cause rather of passing away than of coming to be, since it is the number of movement, and movement removes what is present. So it is evident that the things that always are, insofar as they always are in time, since neither are they encompassed by time, nor is the existence of them measured by time. A sign of this is that they are not affected by time either, suggesting that they are not in time. Since time is the measure of movement, however, it will be the measure of rest too, since all rest is in time. For it is not the case that as everything in movement must move, so it must be too with what is in time. For time is not movement, but a number of movement. And in a number of movement, it is also possible for there to be what is at rest. For not everything that is unmoving is at rest, but only what, through lacking movement, is naturally moved, as was said in the previous discussion. For thing to be in number is for there to be some number of the thing, and for the existence of it to be measured by the number in which it is, so that if it is time, by time. And time will measure what is moving and what is at rest, insofar as the one is moving and the other is at rest. For it will measure the movement and the rest, saying of what quantities each is. So what is moving, insofar as it is some quantity, will not be measurable by time simply, but insofar as its movement is of some quantity. And so none of the things that are neither in movement nor at rest are in time. For to be in time is to be measured by time, and time is a measure of movement and rest. It is evident then that not every non-being will be in time. For example, all the ones that do not admit of being otherwise, such as the diagonals being commensurable with the sides. For in general, if time is intrinsically a measure of movement, and of other things coincidentally, it is clear that the one whose existence it measures will be all those the same being for which lies in being at rest or moving. Those things, then, that admit of passing away and coming to be, and in general, that at some time are and at some times are not, must be in time, since there will be some greater time that will exceed both their existence and what measures the existence of them. By contrast, non-beings that were, for example, Homer once was, or ones that will be, for example, something in the future, are encompassed by time on whichever of the two sides of the present it encompasses them, and if on both sides, both. But those that it in no way encompasses neither were nor will be. And these are all sorts of non-beings whose opposites always are, as the diagonals being commensurable always is, and this will not be in time, nor therefore will its being commensurable. That is why it always is not, because it is the contrary of what always is. For those things where it is not the case that the contrary always is, these are capable of being and of not being, and there is coming to be and passing away of them. The now is a continuity maker for time, as has been said, since it makes past and future times continuous. And it is, in a general way, a limit of time, since it is a starting point of one time and an end point of another, although this is not evident, as it is in the case of the point remaining where it is. It divides potentially, and insofar as it does so, the now is always a distinct one, whereas insofar as it binds together, it is always the same, just as in the case of mathematical lines. For to understand, it is not always the same point, since it divides in distinct places on distinct occasions. But insofar as it is one, it is the same on all. So too, the now is on the one hand a potential divider of time, and on the other hand the limit and unifier of both segments. But the division and the unification are the same with respect to the same thing, but their being is not the same. This then is one way in which things are said to be now. Another is when the time of something is near to it. He will come now, because he will come today. He will come, he has now come, because he has came today. But the events of the Iliad have not happened now, nor is the flood now. Not that the time is not continuous from now to then, but because they are not near at hand. And at some time is defined relative to the first sort, indivisible now. The example, at some time Troy was taken, and at some time there will be a flood, since the time must be limited relative to the now. There will therefore be a certain quantity of time from this to that future one, and there was a certain quantity to the past one. But if there is no time, that is not some time, every time will be limited. Will time therefore give out, or will it not do so, if indeed there is always movement? Will a time then always be a distinct one, or the same one many times over? It is clear that time exists in the same way that movement exists. For if one and the same movement comes to be at some time, the time too will be one and the same, and if not, it will not be. But since the now is the end point and the starting point of time, but not of the same time, since it is the end point of past time and the starting point of future time, then just as the circle has its convexity and its concavity, in the same way too, so time is always at a starting point and an end point. And because of this, it seems to be always distinct. For the now is not the starting and end point of the same thing, since otherwise contraries would hold of it at the same time and in the same respect. Time will not give out then, since it is always at a starting point. The just is the part of future time that is close to the present indivisible now. When are you taking a walk? I'm just taking it, because the time in which the person is going to take it is near at hand. Or it is the part of past time that is not far from the now. When are you taking a walk? I've just taken it. But to say that Troy has just been taken? We do not say that, because it is too far from the now. The recently is the part of the past that is close to the present now. When did you come? Recently. If the time is near to the present existing now. What is far away from now is long ago. The suddenly is what departed from its former condition in a time that is imperceptible because of its smallness, and all change is from a former condition. It is in time that all things come to be and pass away. That is why some people call it the wisest of all things, whereas the Pythagorean Pairon speaks more correctly, calling it the most ignorant, because people forget in time. It is clear, then, that it will be intrinsically the cause of passing away rather than of coming to be, as was stated earlier, for all change is intrinsically from a former condition, but it is coincidentally a cause of coming to be and of being. An adequate sign of this is that nothing comes to be without its being moved in some way and being affected, whereas a thing may pass away even though it does not move at all. And this, above all, is why what is usually said to be passing away due to time. Nevertheless, time does not produce even this change, though it happens that it too occurs in time. It has been stated then that time exists and what it is, and in how many ways something is said to be now, and what at the same time, recently, just, long ago, and suddenly. With these issues determined by us in this way, it is evident that every change and everything in movement is in time. For the faster and the slower exists with respect to every change, since it is seen in every case. By something's moving faster, I mean that it changes before another into the given condition when it covers the same distance with a regular movement. For example, in the case of spatial movement, if both things move along the circumference of a circle or both along a straight line, and similarly in all other cases. But then, what is before is in time, since we say before and after with respect to the distance from the now, and the now is the defining mark between the past and the future. So since the nows are in time, and before and after will also be in time, for the distance from the now will be what the now is in. Things, though, are said to be before in contrary ways with respect to past time and future time. For in the past we say that what is before is further from the now, what is after nearer to it, whereas in the future we say that what is before is nearer and what is after further. So since the before is in time and the before goes along with every movement, it is evident that every change and every movement is in time. It is also worth investigating how time is related to the soul, and why time seems to be in everything on earth, in the sea, and in the heaven. Or is it because it is an attribute or state of time, since it is in fact the number of it, and because all these things are movable, since they are in place, and time and movement are together, both potentially and actively? One might raise a puzzle, however, as to whether, if the soul did not exist, time would not exist. For, if it is impossible for there to be something to do the counting, it is also impossible for anything to be countable, so that it is clear that number would not exist either, since a number is either what has been counted or that can be counted. But if there is nothing that has in its nature to do the counting other than the soul, and of soul understanding, then it is impossible for time to exist or for the soul not to exist. Then it is impossible for time to exist and for soul not to exist, except that there might be that thing, whatever it is, by being which time is what it is. For example, if it is possible for movement to exist without soul. The before and after are in a movement, and time is these insofar as they are countable. One might raise a puzzle, however, as to what sort of movement time is the number of, or is it any sort whatsoever? For things also come to be and pass away, and increase, alter, and spatial movement in time. Insofar as each is a movement, then to this extent, time is its number. This is why it is unconditionally the number of continuous movement, and not of a particular sort of it. But it might be objected, it is not possible that now another thing has also moved, with time being the number of each of the two movements. Is there then a distinct time, and will there be two equal times at once? Or is this not so? For a time that is both equal and together is the same time. And even these that are not together are the same in species. For suppose there are dogs and horses, 7 of each. The number is the same. In the same way, movements that have limits that are together take the same time, although one perhaps is fast and the other not, one a spatial movement and the other an alteration. Yet the time of the alteration and of the spatial movement is the same, if indeed it is the case both that its number is equal and that their limits are together. And this is why, while movements are distinct and separate, time is the same everywhere, because the number belonging to movements are equal and together is the same everywhere. But since there is spatial movement, and among them circular movement, and each thing is counted by some one thing of the same kind, units by a unit, horses by a horse, and in the same way, times by definite times, and since, as we said, time is measured by movement as well as movement by time, and this is so because the quantity of the movement and the time is measured by the movement defined by the time. If then what is first is the measure of all things of the same kind, regular circular spatial movement is most of all a measure, because the number of it is most knowable. Neither alteration nor increase nor coming to be are regular, whereas spatial movement is. That is why time is thought to be the movement of the sphere, because the other movements are measured by this one, and time by this movement. This is also why the customary saying comes about. For it is said that human affairs go in a circle, as do other things, that have a natural movement and coming to be and passing away. And this is so because all other things are adjudged by time, and get an end and a start, as if in accord with a certain temporal cycle. For even time itself is thought to be a sort of circle, and this, in turn, is thought because it is the measure of this sort of spatial movement, and is itself measured by this sort. So that to say that these things that come to be go in a circle is to say that there is a certain circle of time, and that this is so because it is measured by the circular spatial movement. For the measured thing appears to be nothing beyond the measure, but the whole universe involves a plurality of measures. It is also correctly said, however, that the number of the sheep and that of dogs is the same number, if the two numbers are equal, but that they are neither the same 10, nor 10 of the same things, just as the equilateral and the scalene are not the same triangles, even though they are the same figure, because both are triangles. For things are said to be the same if they do not differ by a differentia, but not if they do. For example, triangle differs from triangle by differentia of triangle. Therefore, they are then distinct triangles. But they do not differ by one of figure, but are in one and the same division of it. For such and such sort of figure is a circle, and such sort a triangle, and of this such and such sort is equilateral, and such sort is scalene. They are then the same figure, and this is a triangle. But not the same triangle. Hence, the numbers we are discussing are also the same number, for one does not differ from the other by a differentia of number, but is not the same 10, since the things of which it is said differ, for the one lot are dogs and the other lot horses or sheep. We have now spoken about time, both time itself and the topics that properly belong to its investigation.